Thank you once again for joining us. I know that you will find these discussions illuminating and fascinating, and be reminded that the world is still a wonderful place. And now, enjoy Black women biographers, Claiming Our Space and Shining Our Light, moderated by the magnificent Carole Boston Weatherford. Carole is the author of more than 50 books and has had multiple honors, including Caldecott and Coretta Scott King. Last year, in 2020, she won a Newbery Honor for Box. Henry Brown Mails Himself to Freedom. She's also a New York Times bestselling author and professor at Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. Panelists, will you turn on your videos and audio now? And Carole, I'll turn this over to you and say goodbye.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome panelists. Some of us were just together last night for a virtual tea, so it's a treat to get to see some of you 2 days in a row. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then we'll get started, and then I'll show you their books, and we'll field some questions. Lesa Cline-Ransome is an award-winning author of many picture book biographies, along with the Finding Langston middle grade series. Lesa often collaborates with illustrator James Ransom, me too, in books, love, and co-parenting 4 kids and 1 dog. Of course, Cosby is not here, but she has illustrated the picture book biography Exquisite, The Poetry and Life of Gwendolyn Brooks, which received both Sibert and Coretta Scott King honors. Tracy Todd is a veteran children's book editor and is the author of Nina, A Story of Nina Simone, illustrated by Christian Robinson. April Harrison is the illustrator of Shirley Chisholm Dared, Nana Aqua Goes to School, and the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe New Talent Award-winning illustrator of What is Given from the Heart. Oge Mora is the illustrator of The Oldest Student and Saturday. She is a John Steptoe New Talent Award winner and the Caldecott honor-winning creator of Thank You, Omu. And before I do anything else, I'm going to screen share. I want you to see the covers of the beautiful covers of their books. Bear with me just a second. So you see all the beautiful covers. Just give you a second to gaze at those, because I think they're all just so breathtaking. All right, so ladies, the first question is, and I'll let you go in whatever order you prefer, but I do ask that you keep the questions, your answers brief, because we do have a large panel. Why does it matter that Black women tell Black women's stories?
I'll go first.
Okay. I'll call on people for the next question.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Because we are they in which we speak. Who else will tell our stories and give them the respect that they deserve? You know, we're wonderful people, we're unique, and we're women. And I feel that me telling a story rings true to who I am, because I have similar traits and loves and wants and etc.
Yeah, I think the women we write about could be our mothers, our aunts, our sisters, our sister friends. Lesa?
Well, I feel like throughout history, I think our stories, Black people's stories, especially Black women's stories, have been told and interpreted by other people. And I think that people should always have the opportunity to tell the stories in the ways they want told, to represent themselves in the way they feel they should be represented. And so that's why it's really important for us to be able to tell our own stories, especially as women who have often lost their voices through the stories and words of men, especially Black women.
Okay.
I think there's, I really get the idea of the women, these the stories that we tell, these are the stories of our mothers, these are the stories of our sisters, these are the stories of the women who mean so much to us in our lives. I think that definitely informs the illustration work that I do. And on knowing how powerful and how important these stories are, cherishing those stories because you cherish yourself and you cherish those Black women around you, definitely makes it more important that we tell these stories, because it comes from a special kind of love that us Black women have together.
One another.
Connie?
I feel it's very important that we tell our own stories. I have daughters. I know with me, had I my history or her story, I probably would not have made some of the mistakes that I made. So it's important for me to write stories that can help a better future for my daughter, for other daughters, and then to reward my ancestors for the struggle that they went through, especially the struggles that I'm just as a soon to be 50-year-old learning about. So it's very important that I tell the story to read a better future for my own daughters.
Mhm.
And before we hear from Tracy, just a show of hands, how many on the panel have a daughter or a daughter figure? Okay. All right. So Tracy, if you can answer that question, not only from the standpoint of an author, but also as an editor, and in terms of the projects that you acquire.
Well, I think I really don't have a lot to add to what everyone has said. I mean, I think that it's important for us to tell our stories because we know them, and because we bring authenticity to them. And that is certainly the same thing that I would be looking for as an editor wanting to acquire a book. And also, I think that, we can take a familiar story or a familiar figure and find a thing that is familiar to us, but unfamiliar perhaps to the larger audience. And I think that is something also that I look for when I'm writing, when I'm thinking about what I want to write. And also when I think about what I want to acquire, what is the personal thread that is in this story? What is the thing that resonates with me? What is the thing that resonates with the author, that will illuminate this figure in a way that this figure hasn't been illuminated before?
Thanks, Tracy. All right, before I go to the next question, I want to share, since we're nonfiction people, I want to share a bit of information. And earlier this month, in fact, or maybe it was last month, I had an article appear in School Library Journal, Black Nonfiction, Truth, Testament, and Good Trouble. And some of you actually either contributed to it because there's a book list that goes with the article of 50 Black nonfiction titles by Black creators, or were mentioned in the book list or in the article. So the 5 types of Black nonfiction that I staked out were I call them all testaments to tradition, testaments of trials and trauma, testaments of triumphs and transformation, testaments to train up a child, and finally, testaments and tribute. And of course, that's what we're talking about today. So I'm going to show your books one more time while I ask this question, and then I'll go back to the full screen. How and why does your subject resonate with you? And you may have answered in part through the last question, but I'd like for you to just specifically talk about your book. So let's start with Tracy this time, since we ended with her.
Sure. Well, my dad raised me on Nina Simone and Ray Charles, and Mahalia Jackson and some other people, but really Nina Simone and Ray Charles. And I carried her music with me into adulthood when I became curious about who this woman was, what her story was. There was a strength there. There was something in her voice that was haunting, that wouldn't let me go. And when I read her autobiography and found that moment where she gave a recital in her hometown, and her parents were sitting in the front row, and they were removed to the back row so a white couple could take their place, I just felt like, oh, here is a moment where Nina is 9, 10, 11 years old, there's so much richness in her childhood that I think that, would resonate with children. So I wanted to, that's where the story started for me. And that's really why I wanted to tell her story.
And I have a similar story about RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. I inherited my love for female vocalists from my father. So Aretha Franklin was one of his favorite, well, she was probably his favorite R&B vocalist. He liked Stevie Wonder too, but that's what brought me to the Aretha Project. So April?
With Shirley Chisholm, I like paying homage to powerful Black women. And in honesty, I didn't know a lot about Shirley before I read her book, Unbought and Unbossed. And once I read it, I was just enamored by her. To take such a small little package of a woman to be so powerful and so productive. And she made so much change in the world. And it started all as a bossy little girl. I mean, she bossed everyone around. She bossed her mom around. I think in her book, she said she believed her mom was afraid of her, but she was only like 3 or 4 at the time, but she was very determined. She was powerful, determined, and she didn't stay back. She didn't sit back. She always came forward. She was always in your face. And that little girl traveled all the way to the White House, basically the Senate and then on to the White House. But it was amazing just to read about her. So I was really happy about that. I was really happy to read about her, to see how determined she was and what a powerful woman she was. And she had played no favorites. That's what I loved about her. She, in the Senate, whoever went with her program or who would agree with her, whether it was a Democrat or Republican, that's who she spoke with. She played no favorites. And I like that about her.
I think to survive in this industry and to really to preserve your authentic voice, you have to be a bit unbought and unbossed as a Black creator as well. Connie, tell us why Elizabeth Keckly resonated with you.
Okay, so Elizabeth, she resonated with me. One, I didn't like history growing up. I'm a bright person. I don't like dark colors, don't resonate with me. And with Elizabeth, she came to me in a dream. I knew nothing about her. Like I said, I had ethnic studies growing up in New York. I really didn't know too much about social studies, but with ethnic stories, the stories were horrible. Elizabeth came to me bright in my dream, and she presented herself as a fashion stylist. And in the dream, I was at an event with my son, who's a celebrity fashion stylist. And so I was captured by her dresses, well, the dress she had on and the color. And throughout the dream, and I have these out of body experiences in life. In the dream, she told me she was the best friend. First, she was a slave, her own autobiography. She was best friends and a confidant to Mary Todd Lincoln, who was Abraham Lincoln's wife. She was invited in the White House. And growing up, even to now, what don't make sense, I don't comprehend. I'm not a joking type of person. If it's crazy and it don't make sense, I don't comprehend it. So that dream, I didn't comprehend it. I woke up and faintish a little bit, woke Frank up, which I normally do when I have these out of body experiences. And I told him, write this down, because normally when I wake back up in my natural realm, I don't remember a lot of things. And so when I woke up from the dream, he told me, Connie, you had an encounter. It was a slave. You said her name was Elizabeth, and she was a fashion stylist. And so what resonated with me with Elizabeth the most was, one, she said she was a slave that purchased home freedom. Two, she was highly into fashion and beauty and color. And what color means to me meant to her. Like, I love rainbows, I love color, I love bright. And I tend to make my own meaning for colors. And so her last request before allowing me to wake up was to rewrite her story the way that I would have read it as a child, if I, was allowed to see the book, or if I happened to find it. And so I felt the need to rewrite her story, not telling the deep, dark secrets, but letting girls know, like, the strength. Like, we are strong. We were strong in slavery. We were able to accomplish our dreams and fulfill our dreams,
So true, so
you know,
true.
purchase
Yeah.
our freedom. And so today I'm thankful that she chose me and that she came to me. And I've been learning a lot since, meeting Elizabeth through a dream. And she, introduced me to history, that I could pick up a book and read the history and capture the happy moments, not just the deep,
Okay. Thank you, Connie. Just show of hands, how many of you have had, a similar type of mystical experience or experience channeling some of the people whose lives you've profiled? I for one, have. Lesa, let's hear from you on that question. And to refresh your memory, how and why does your subject resonate with you? And of course, your subject resonated with me in 2008 with Moses, when Harriet Tubman led her people to freedom. And I think your book, my book, and perhaps Minty the three of those books are a trio of classics about my Shiro, Harriet Tubman.
Yeah, so your book was definitely a mentor text for me when I started writing before she was Harriet. But growing up, and when I was a child, Harriet Tubman, when I first was introduced to Harriet Tubman and first heard about her, she was one of the first people who kind of interrupted the narrative that I heard about when I was a kid on slavery and enslavement. She was the first person I read about who kind of completely changed my understanding of resistance, and not just escaping, but I never learned about resistance in my history textbooks or classroom discussions. Whether it's passive resistance, reading and writing, or active resistance like escaping. So here was Harriet, this Black woman who to me embodied resistance and feminism and self-determination. So aside from my mother and older sister, I was this incredibly shy, nervous kid. And there was Harriet Tubman, who was strong and bold and did things that men couldn't even, often men couldn't find a way to do. Harriet did over and over and over again. I thought, this strength and this will was someone that I've always aspired to be, to find this inner strength and this courage. And so I've always wanted to write her story, and I just couldn't find my way in. And especially when there were such perfect books like yours, I thought, how could I find a new way to tell her story? So
well, you found it, sis. And Harriet has been, I think Harriet is she was a superhero, I believe. Okay,
absolutely.
You wrote about a different type of woman, not necessarily a woman that you would read about. I mean, and most of these women you wouldn't read about in history. Many of them, except for Harriet Tubman, you might not read about in history books, because Black women are given such short shrift when it comes to the textbooks, and we're just not given the credit that we're due. Okay, wrote about a 100-year-old woman who learned to read. So, okay, you wrote about literacy. What about, as an illustrator, what about that story resonated with you?
Oh yeah, of course. I just to echo what you said, I think that was the thing that struck me the most when I was a kid and was in my school. And I grew up in a really rich, wonderful Black community. And I was just always struck by how so much of our history was missing. The things that the women in my neighborhood and people would tell me about, or the things that we would talk about, and the people that were important in our lives. And I would go into school and I just would never hear about these people, or people just didn't know who these people were. I think even me, like I've only written fiction, but I have tried pitching some nonfiction pieces, and I would try to tell a story about this person or this person, and I would get feedback that that story is just too niche. And I was always wondering, like, well, how is it that my stories are too niche? But then when it's not women of color or Black women, then suddenly these are the stories that very easily find their ways into the pages. So something that really struck me when I was looking at The Oldest Student originally as a manuscript was it immediately reminded me of so many stories of women who have in their ways are missing in so many pages. And I think the thing that I find so beautiful about illustration is illustration, it's in the actual origins of the word itself. It's all about illuminating. It's all about how can you bring light to these stories. And so that's something that's very important in my work. And when I thought about Mary Walker and how she learned to read at 116, it resonated for me, because like these people I have heard and grew up with, it reminded me of a very important family friend who was like a grandmother to me after my own grandmother passed away. And I remember helping her learn to read so that she could do her American citizenship test, and how literacy is an act of freedom, and how that was denied us, especially Black women, for so many years. It felt important to illuminate that and bring light to that in my illustrations.
Thanks, Oge. Of course, so many stories about Black women, as I said, have been omitted, or if they're told, they're skewed, and we're have been treated as in a stereotypical fashion so often. And I think it's so important that we sisters can bring stories forward in a way that that we look up to these sheroes, whether they're unsung sheroes or famous people whose stories have not been fully told. So I'm going to share some spreads from your beautiful books, and I'd like for you to tell us about the spread, and either how it illuminates the subject matter, or how the spread reflects your creative decisions. So we're going to start with April. And say the name of your book again. Plug your book again too.
Shirley, Chisholm Dared. In this scene, I had another slide, but I decided to show this one because it starts as a child. Your personality develops when you're young. And I wanted to show the perfect, defiant little Black girl. I wanted to show her in all her little glory, because a lot of times in the educational system, they feel that a defiant child is a troublemaker, but that defiance helps her be who she needs to be later on in life. It's setting the pattern for whom she will be later on. And I used to think sometimes it was like that, like, oh, if she is determined, or she's to be something that, or she talks back, or, she doesn't mind. I used to think that was a bad kid. A lot of people put bad on a child like that, but really they're just, what's the word for that? They may be a challenge to you while they're young, but they have greatness coming if you guide them in the right direction. And I think with this picture, I just wanted to show Shirley as a little girl, determined to be where she needed to be. And that was in the very first seat of that schoolroom. And that was her very first time going to school. And her place was literally in the back with the rest of the smaller kids. But Shirley decided, no, I belong in the front. And she has kept that attitude. She kept that attitude all the way up through. And that's why I decided to show this particular panel.
She's just the cutest little peanut on that front row too. Okay, Tracy.
Yes. So in this scene, Nina is just sort of newly famous, and she is, at the same time, the unrest of Black people rising and being unwilling to accept being mistreated for as long as they have. Is sort of is resounding in the streets, and she hears this call to action, but she's not ready to join it yet. And when I wrote this spread, when I wrote these words, I was thinking about all of the chaos, all of the directions in which Nina was being pulled. And I love that instead of, Christian showed some of that, But instead of having Nina react to all these things, which is very much the way I think women, Black women in particular, are, we try to put out all the fires. Instead, Christian had her rest, which is a powerful act and an important thing to see Black women especially doing, I think. I love that he put that little cap on her head. I think it shows her vulnerability, and he has said in interviews that it was important for him to show vulnerability throughout the book. It's one of the reasons that he chose pink for that, the incredible pink for the cover. I just think that this spread is so much about the sort of rising chaos and this rising pull to action, call to action. But what Nina is going to do before she gives her full self over to it is rest. And I appreciate that so much from Christian.
Lesa.
Oh, hi. So this is a scene where, she's most often known as, a conductor. But here we see her up above, looking down on everyone else, kind of in like a biblical stance. And we have her, the text is reading, seeking the promised land for her people, led by dreams and God and faith. And one of the things that was really important to me is, we know her as somebody who is strong and courageous, but one of the things that I infused throughout the book is how her connection to both her parents, her mother used to tell her Bible stories, and she was also very connected to her father, who kind of taught her to read the woods and the stars. That actually helped to prepare her to escape. And so I wanted to be sure the readers knew that it was her faith that played a large role in who she ultimately became. And so including that in the text, and James did an amazing job illustrating her kind of leaning on the stick, but also leaning on her faith.
Now, both Lesa and Connie perhaps have an advantage. I don't think it would be a disadvantage of having an illustrator in the house. So Lesa, I'm going to ask you, tell us, this book was a collaboration with your husband, James. And, tell us about how that process works, in your household when you're, collaborating on a book.
For the most part, it works well. There are moments when there are some conflict. This one was the most cohesive because, James had pitched this idea to me and I wasn't sure that I was ready to write the book. And he kind of gave me the idea for the way it should go. And it just kind of came together really nicely. This was I never give him feedback on illustrations, but this was the first book where I came into the studio as he was illustrating. And I saw one spread, this one he was working on, and I said to him, that's the scene I want for the cover. And he said, don't pick my covers, you don't, that's what I want for the cover. And then I emailed the editor and she said, I agree. And so I said, that's going for the cover. And so there.
So you and Harriet won.
Yes, we won.
Okay.
Yeah, I was really particularly interested by this question when you originally posed it, Carole, and I was like, that's a really interesting idea to think about, like what spread and really thinking out what spread really kind of captures your unique perspective on illustration. And so I really reflected on this and kind of pondered, and I actually ended up settling on this spread. This is a spread, so I think for most kids, there's the question of like, all right, why did Mary Walker learn to read when she was 116? Why was that something like, why didn't she learn to read before, kind of thing? And it's this book kind of really chronologies like the story of Mary Walker and all the things that she was up to and doing and supporting her family, and how reading always had to wait. I think, and this page talks, and Rita talks about this in the text. There's Mary had to work, so she was working as a maid and as a cook, as a nanny. And I think that what was really striking me as an illustrator is that, especially for a lot of Black women, there's that image of us like at work, I think that there's definitely an interpretation of this particular page or of these words as Mary's like sweeping, or she's cleaning, or she's taking care of kids, or she's at least in the space that she's like her workspace. And it was very important for me to show her children, because she had 3 children. And whenever she was off to work, it was the sacrifice of having to leave her children behind so that she could go work. And that was a sacrifice that she made, and so many Black women have made. And I thought of my mom in that regard, because my mom was constantly out of the house just so that she could make sure that me and my 7 siblings had food on the table. And so it became very important for me in this particular scene that show her children, show the family she had to leave behind in order to support that family, that has been such a difficult choice that so many Black women have made. And so I just really wanted to show that. And so I think when I was thinking about, what's your unique position on illustration, I think whenever I'm looking at words, I'm trying to look between the words. I definitely, I think there are times when you should be in unison with the words and you're doing the pictures. And there's times when you guys are doing like a 2-part harmony. And so I think that this was probably a place where Rita and I were harmonizing and thinking about what is going through Mary Walker's mind in this particular day.
Thank you. So much of the story of African-American women, it has been a story of struggle and of sacrifice, of putting our own dreams on hold to raise a family or meet the needs of our not just our family and our household sometimes, but our extended family as well. And often the more prosperous we become, the larger the extended family that we support becomes as well. That's an untold secret of Black women. So Connie,
Yes.
I love Liz Zunon's work. I collaborated with her on the legendary Miss Lena Horne, and I loved what she did with fashion in that book, and I see she has done it again. So I'm going to ask you to talk about what how this spread represents the approach that you took to the book, but also to touch on what Lesa touched on about, even though your husband didn't work with you, Frank didn't work with you on this book, how it is working with your husband, having an artist in the house.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Okay. So I'll start with Frank.
Okay.
It's Frank have an in-house studio and a out of studio. It's to leave Frank to his business, even with my books. I unless he showed me, I kind of sort of waited for the and editors or whoever to show me his work. I try to separate everything with me, have to be balanced in my mindset within me. So I try to leave things as they are. With him as an illustrator, I give him his time, his space, and I let him present it to me business wise. In that manner, if he needs support as a wife, I'm there. Um, and I need my own space for the lighting to be a certain way. I need to be able to hear my higher power speak. And so I'm very peculiar about working because I know it's not about me and Frank. It's about the work and the service that we have to do for our creator and, to provide and give back to his people. So with on the natural side of things, it's pleasant, but on the spiritual side of things, it's hard. It's very, very hard, to kind of, work with my Adam. I am his Eve. It's hard. I am the helpmate. So sometimes to have to even put Connie or what I want as a woman, first, I know I am the helpmate. And so I got to kind of stand to the side and sacrifice. So it's hard. But now pertaining to Liz, um, everything about Liz in this project has been miraculous to me. I didn't know who my illustrator was going to be for the book until the book was finished, until I finished and she finished. And her name resonated with me because Elizabeth was called Liz and Lizzie. And so I looked at that as a sign like, wow, here comes Elizabeth again. And then when I saw she stitched the book, I cried because I knew that's what Elizabeth wanted. And she was the type of woman, Elizabeth Keckly, to take control of what she wanted, even if she got lashed for it. And so when I saw that Liz Zunan stitched out the book, I almost felt as though Elizabeth came and threw herself into Liz and stitched these beautiful images herself. And it was just something. Even today I'm having a speak about it because I'm holding back my tears because it's unbelievable. It's amazing. And I hope that everyone feels, read the book, and when they see Liz Zunan's illustrations, I hope they feel the amazement that I feel. And that's it.
The illustrations are fabulous. And I'm going to give myself a little time to talk about RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. I chose a slide that's not from the book, although this is from the end, the spread is from the end papers, and I just superimposed my structure on that. When I wrote about Aretha Franklin, I wanted it to be what I call an unbiography. So it's not, she was born and da 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 and then. So it's more of a riff on her song Respect, probably her most famous song. And I set up a structure of 3-line rhyming stanzas that each began with a hyphenated first word. And the hyphenated first words all end in a letter that has the long E sound. And I carry that same rhyme all the way through, which probably was a bit risky because it could have gotten monotonous. But of course, I got to work with Connie's husband, Frank, and I didn't have to deal with all that helpmate stuff that she has to deal with. And Frank ended up winning a Coretta Scott King Award for illustration for the project. So this is, it was really fun to write this. One thing I want to touch on is, because I'm a nonfiction nerd, is, what I need to do is stop screen sharing just a second. Yeah, I stopped it, okay. Yeah, okay, we're back. All right, one thing I want to touch on is how nonfiction can also exude Black joy. Even though, much nonfiction, has some conflict in it because real lives do have conflict. How can Black nonfiction, or how does Black nonfiction exude joy or evoke optimism and hope? So Tracy, would you start out?
Sure. Well, I think we must, our books must show joy and must exude hope, because that is the clearest way to fight against oppression. I think just being joyful and unbothered. And even if in the stories that we tell, so Nina's story was not unbothered for sure. But I think it's still important to find those moments, because those are acts of resistance as well. And because our story is joyful, in as painful as some of our story is, it is also joyful. So I don't know if I found enough joyful moments in Nina, but it was something that certainly I think Christian found and brought to the fore. So, and then of course, hope, I ended the book with hope, a direct address to Black children, sort of an homage to Young, Gifted, and Black. It just is meant to be empowering and hopeful, because I think her story in many ways was.
And, of course, her music was, had so much social commentary in it, but at the same time, it was meant to uplift, and nowhere is that, more present than in the song To Be Young, Gifted, and Black.
Yeah.
April, you want to take a stab at this question? This notion of Black joy and Black nonfiction?
Yeah, I just feel with any story, it shows any child, any person, how far we've come that and how far we have to go. But it also offers hope all along the way. And it lets them know that they're not alone. You know, everyone has something they've been through. And this provides that hope and that silver lining that all people need to see. You know, because even though right now you're labeling your experience as a bad experience, a lot of times it's a great experience, and you'll find out that answer at the end of the journey. You know, a lot of times we always label what we're going through right now without really knowing why we're going through it. But later on, you understand why you went through it. And so I believe that with any situation, we need to always have hope. You know, we need to pray. We need to also make sure our children have that hope and joy and understanding, because in the world we live in today, it's difficult a lot of times for a child to see the hope. And I think as guardians of our children, we need to provide that, even if it is a nonfiction book. You can always read the book with your child and find that silver lining, so that child will know that there's always hope. Always.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of joy in overcoming and showing that if this larger than life person could
Exactly.
not only endure but transcend their condition, then perhaps I can too in this age. Connie, you want to speak to that?
Yes, it's very important to I have this saying to my children. I tell them, never to allow anyone ignorance to become yours. You live out the life that God would want you to live. You love yourself the way God loves you. You see yourself the way God sees you, and God is within you if you keep your mind free and pure. So it's very important. And I also teach them you have to fail sometimes to know what it is to win. It's always a negative versus a positive, or a positive versus a negative. And it's not always bad. It's for my boys, I tell them it's your history. And for my daughters, I teach them it's your history. So it's very important for me to be able to pick up a book that have my daughters on the front of it and present it to my daughters and have them read it to get them into understanding of what struggle is, what, triumph is, what tragedies are, and to turn their tragedies into their triumphs. So
Okay, thanks. Lesa and okay, I want you to just real quickly weigh in on this, and then we're going to do one more question and get to some questions from the audience.
Oh, yeah.
I think I agree with everyone, but I think that joy is not always people smiling and having a happy dinner. I think that joy is our stories, the fact that we're still here, that we have persevered, and that our struggles and overcoming our struggles is our joy.
It is. Okay.
I think that we have to talk about our hardships because there are hardships, but I think there's that line of not being defined by our hardships, but being defined by like us as like an entirety of people, And I think when I think about the oldest student, at the back of the book, we see Mary as a young girl when she first received that Bible, and it says, "You're never too old to learn." And then that idea is like reflected again on the front page where we see when she's finally able to read that Bible that she received when she was like 15. And so I think that like throughout this book, I really kind of attack that really with color. So there's a lot of muted tones, but there are little specks of yellow that kind of pop in. And then when she finally learns to read, everything, it's a big yellow spread. And it's followed by even more color and more yellows and pinks and blues that kind of all come together and really like show how this world has kind of reached full bloom as she's like kind of experienced this moment of triumph. And
Thanks,
so
okay. I want real quickly, I would like for each of you to tell us the title of your upcoming book and give us the pub date if you know it. So we'll start with Connie and then go clockwise.
my upcoming book is Stitch by Stitch, the Elizabeth Keckly story, and the pub date is, I believe, November 1st.
Oh, I'm talking about your next book. So we're going to show the slides of the books we're talking of these. I got the Christmas spirit.
Okay, I got The Christmas Spirit. That's a book that is republished every year, and it's actually it's out now.
Okay, great.
To purchase.
Okay.
Mine is H is for Harlem, and the pub date, I believe, is March 2022.
My next biography about an African-American woman is Call Me Miss Hamilton, and it's illustrated by my son, Jeffrey Weatherford. The pub date is in January, I believe, 2022. Lesa?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mine is Of Walden Pond, Henry David Thoreau, Frederick Tudor,